Okay, so if everybody can have a seat. Matthew is ready to go. Matthew Thornton, Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications for the Ontario Real Estate Association. And Matthew is going to talk about all the changes in our industry and how OREA is tackling the changes. He's going to talk about REBBA 2002 and give us a bit of an update on that and multiple representation. Housing affordability in the Ontario Fair Housing Plan, which ties in very nicely with Redwood Park, and the Ontario Growth Plan, and key changes to the governance of the Ontario Real Estate Association. And welcome Matthew.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing out there today? Good. I love it. I want to thank, first of all, Julia and Rob and the team for the invite to speak today. I think the last time I was out in front of the Barrie group was 2015, about 2 years ago. We were at the Golf and Country Club. So it's always a pleasure to be here and speaking with you folks. So just a little bit about me to start off. My name's Matthew. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications at OREA. What does that mean? Essentially, I'm the guy or a leader of a team of folks at OREA that is responsible for lobbying the provincial government on your behalf. So we work every day fighting to protect the Canadian dream of home ownership and protecting your business interests at Queen's Park. Real estate is provincially regulated, so obviously you have a lot of interests up there in terms of the rules that govern your business. So that's what I do on a day-to-day job, or day-to-day life. I do have a connection to Barrie though. This goes back to the probably mid-1990s. Does anyone remember the Barrie ICEMEN? Anyone remember? I have kids in minor hockey. You remember the Barrie ICEMEN? So I played hockey in Barrie. My parents own a farm just north of Barrie, ninth line of Oro. So I grew up there, played hockey here in Barrie, so I know Barrie pretty well. Actually, I don't know if Mark Ferris is in the room, but Mark and I played on the same team together for a number of years. So always have some great memories of Barrie in my time here. And then a little bit more about me. Oh, this has nothing to do with my presentation today, but who doesn't love to see cute pictures of babies earlier in the day? This is my new little girl. She's 5 months old. Her name's Emma. I'm a brand new dad, or fairly new dad anyways. So we're having a lot of fun. This explains the bags underneath my eyes, but that's okay. Anyways. Okay, so let's get to it. So what I want to cover today is quite simple. I want to talk a little bit about the new OREA. There's been some big changes at your provincial association in the last 6 months. And then I want to delve into some bigger changes that are happening with the Real Estate Act here in the province. Then we can do a quick update on a couple of GR issues, and if there's still time and I'm not too close to lunch, we'll take questions. Okay, let's get into it. Oh, help me out here, tech guy. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the new OREA, big changes. So early this year, I think most folks in the room will know, we found out that we lost the Educational Service Agreement. So that agreement was with the Real Estate Council of Ontario. It was for the delivery of licensing education or registration education for new real estate professionals in the province. Most of you probably took those courses and received that education. So that contract will be wrapping up with RICO in 2020. In terms of changes to the association, that's about 60% of our operating budget. It comes through the college. So that's quite significant. So what that meant was our board, our leadership at the association had to come up with a new vision, a new strategic direction for the association. So they met this year, earlier this year in the spring, and created this new 5-year strategic plan that we're quite proud of. The long and short of it is the association going forward is going to be leaner, meaner, more focused on fewer things, but we're going to be doing those fewer things better. That's the message. So things like advocacy in particular, because we're a provincial association and you guys are regulated provincially, we have a natural niche there. So we're going to be focusing a lot on that. and creating, Tim talks about this, and I'm sure he'll talk about it tomorrow when he visits you guys, a wider, taller public profile. We want to be engaged in the debate on issues that matter to realtors and making sure that the realtor message, the pro-realtor message, is promoted for sure. So that's a little bit about the changes in the strat plan on OREA, and that has a big impact on the next topic for today. So, REBBA reform, the beginning. Let me take you back to, not Ontario, but British Columbia, February of 2016. Who remembers this, by the way? The Globe and Mail coverage, shadow flipping. This is where I think a lot of the media attention, in particular on real estate, starts. There was an issue in British Columbia, as I said, called shadow flipping, centered around the assignments, or issue of assignments. And what started as really one story in the Globe, one investigative report, quickly spawned into daily coverage of some unethical folks working in the industry. And, unfortunately, quite a muted response from the industry. So the BC Association of Realtors and the local boards out there really didn't contribute much to the discussion. The coverage really just got out of control quite quickly. So into the vacuum, as so often happens, steps government. And boy, did they ever step. CHRISTY, who was the premier at the time, held a press conference kind of in response to the ongoing media coverage where she announced some big changes to the industry. The number one commitment was the banning of assignments. She committed to banning the practice of double ending. She struck an independent advisory group made up of non-realtors to review the industry and come back with recommendations on how to change things. And then she also said, I'm going to take away self-regulation. So you guys, the industry, you can't be trusted to run things anymore. We're going to take that over and change that. So that's quite significant in BC. And they're still running through these changes right now. There's a new superintendent responsible for their regulator. They actually, not dissolved the regulator, but they got rid of the board and replaced it with a superintendent who's responsible for things out there now. So it's quite a mess. It's quite a mess. And I think evidence of that is there we go. Oh, one at a time. Here we go. This is a quote from the premier at a news conference that she hosted on the real estate issue. So she says, we need to stop greedy and shady operators from ripping people off. I think this is a good indication of where their heads were at when they were stepping into this file. In public affairs, we call this an uh-oh moment. I think we're in some serious trouble as the industry association. So here in Ontario, this was a really useful learning experience for us. If I can get to the next slide. There we go. Back up. Back up. Here we go. So BC was spring of 2016. Ours really started in the fall of 2016. And who remembers the CBC Marketplace report? Oh boy, wasn't that fun. So what do you have in Ontario? You have a very hot Toronto market. You have a lot of frustrated consumers, and that obviously is generating a lot of media interest. So CBC did an investigative report where they went undercover into some open houses and talked with listing agents, primarily in the GTA, from what we know. They were able to catch 6 folks on camera, making some rather unsavory commitments to the undercover operatives in those cases. So that was bad. That was really bad. And that really, for us, if it was the assignments and shadow flipping in BC, that was our sort of uh-oh moment here in Ontario. As part of that investigative report, the minister was actually interviewed, and we were able to do some, because we got a heads up on the story, we were able to do some behind the scenes work with her office to make sure that she didn't do any knee-jerk responses. So that was good, but they did commit to action on multiple representation. So as far as the regulation goes and the work that's happening on REBBA, this is where it really starts. With media story, which generated some more media coverage, and then a response by government to say, we're going to do something. We don't know what that is, but we're going to do something. So as an association, we had to take action. And our position was from the get-go that it's not enough for the industry to say, you know, government, there's not a problem, or there's not an issue, so don't do anything. Because we knew that they were going to do something. We just didn't know what that was yet. So our strategy from the get-go was, instead of just focusing on multiple representation, let's talk about reform more generally. Let's talk about REBBA and the need to update the Act, because the Act is 15 years old. Passed in 2002, most of the regulations were adopted in 2006. So, you know, by modern standards, there's a lot there that could be updated. So we took that message up to Queen's Park. We had, you know, numerous meetings. We met with the Premier herself, some of her senior staff, a number of ministers in cabinet. Again, the ask was for, okay, if you're going to tackle multiple rep, fine, we can tackle that, but let's look at the Act as well. And I think as a result of that good advocacy, that, you know, behind the scenes lobbying, which is what the Provincial Association does on your behalf, we were able to get them to commit as part of their fair housing plan to review REBBA, in addition to looking at multiple rep at the same time. So that was a quite significant win for us at the end of the day. So in stark contrast to what we saw in BC, we had our Premier, and I don't know how most folks feel about Premier Wynne, but in this sense, she you know, did do us quite a favor. Saying, you know, we're working with realtors right now to identify, this is in response to a question about multiple rep, what those issues were and the practices and review the rules. So compare that to Christy Clark calling the industry shady and greedy. Our Premier is saying, you know, we're working with them. So quite a significant difference, and I think a testament to the approach that we took. So the review itself got launched this year, in the summer of this year, June. The first phase is focusing on multiple representation, and I'll get into a little bit more of that in a second. So the association, OREA, struck a task force to help us go through the consultation process. The task force is made up of 16 industry members, realtors from across the province. We've got commercial realtors, brokers of record, salespeople, team leaders, CEOs of franchises, CEOs of associations, a really distinguished group that's doing the legwork on the review and guiding our response. So the first phase is on multiple representation, as I said. That's what we saw. I'll get to more on that in a second. Second phase is going to extend well into 2018. That's going to look at the entire Act. So this is a huge opportunity for the industry, the review I mean, to tackle some really crucial issues to the way that you folks do business. So that's how we've approached it, and that's why, you know, I'll talk about it in a sec, why we're running a really cool consultation right now. So phase one is focusing on multiple representation. The government, in all its wisdom, only gave us 35 days to come up with a really complex response to a very complex problem. They issued what's called a white paper or a consultation paper. Typically what that means is, you know, they sketch out some thoughts or ideas on what they think the direction of the policy should be, put that out for public comment, and then stakeholders like OREA respond with their feedback. So in that consultation paper, they said, we're going to replace, or we think we want to replace, multiple representation with a system called mandatory designated representation. So the idea that, again, this is focused at the individual registrant level, not at the brokerage level. So if you have two clients who are interested in the same property, MDR would say, you have to designate another salesperson or broker from your brokerage to represent one of the parties. That's the rule. And then in addition to that, they said, but there will be limited exceptions to that rule. So it's not a complete blanket requirement to do MDR. There will be some exceptions. OREA, RICO, and others tell us what those exceptions should be. So that was really the focus of our work. It was clear from the get-go that multiple representation, sort of in its current reform, was out. They were going to move forward with this MDR requirement, and the question for us was, what does that look like? So some of the things that the task force struggled with and worked on was, how can we come up with a system that reforms multiple representation but doesn't ban it altogether? A lot of the media attention focused on, double ending, and they would conflate multiple representation with double ending. You guys know that that's not the case, but media likes to simplify things for their readers. How can we protect consumer choice, but also increase consumer protection? How can we make sure that whatever system is brought forward, it reflects the diversity of Ontario's real estate markets, local real estate markets? How business is done in Barrie isn't how it's necessarily done in a place like Sault Ste. Marie or Toronto. So how can we come up with a system that's flexible? But also, how can we come up with a system that protects your ability to work with your longtime clients? That's something that, the folks on the task force kept, I think, top of mind constantly. We didn't want a system where, you've worked with a buyer showing them properties for 6 months, you get a listing which is perfect for them, and just because of this rule, you can't work with your buyer. You have to refer them to another agent or brokerage. So, what did we come up with? If I can get to it, here we go. So our key recommendation in response to the phase 1 submission was, we said, okay, government, you're going to do mandatory designated representation, fine, but the exception to the rule has to be, or should be, a system which we call transactional representation. And I'll get to a little bit more about what that is in a second. But we borrowed the concept, and some of you, I don't know if some of you have ever practiced in other provinces. Alberta and Nova Scotia, this is the model that we borrowed from them. In those provinces, they call it transactional brokerage. And it really is, if you look at sort of agency and how agency is regulated in Canada, those two provinces have, I think, are leaders in this area. So other recommendations we included in our phase 1 also talk about fines and disclosures. We also advocated for specialty licensing and incorporation of realtors as well. So here's what we were up against as far as the phase 1 work went. The Toronto Star, this is in response to the work that the government was doing on multiple rep, comes out with an op-ed saying, ban all double ending, get rid of it, they shouldn't be able to do it. Then on the other hand, you had our regulator, RICO, saying, we support mandatory designated representation, but the only exception to the rule should be if you're a realtor or a consumer working in a place like Moose Factory. So very rural communities where there weren't a lot of agents. That's the only exception to that rule, which we thought was crazy. And I think it showed that, while REA did its homework on this file and looked at a lot of other jurisdictions, some other folks didn't. But that's what we were up against. So media and the regulator in favor of a much, much stricter system, either a ban or a much stricter system of MDR. So the result, and again, this is, I'm kind of fast forwarding the process here a bit, but there was a lot of legwork that went into pitching our submission and selling our submission and our recommendation to government. And thankfully, at the end of the day, and this was announced just last week, the government introduced what they call Bill 166 as the Strengthening Protections for Ontario Consumers Act, and it adopted our recommendation. So the government rejected RICO's recommendation. They rejected the sort of public plea to ban double ending, which was ridiculous. And they adopted what they're not calling a transactional rep, they're calling it a facilitation model. They like to brand things in their own way. So that's a significant victory for us. The work's not done yet. There's a lot of work that we still need to do on regulations and other things. But what it will mean at the end of the day is you folks will be able to continue to work with your long-time valued clients. And consumers will be able to decide which realtor they want to work with in a transaction. That's key. So as part of the bill is a kind of like an omnibus bill that deals with a whole bunch of different issues. Real estate is just one of them. In addition to the stuff on representation and agency, there's also some, they're increasing fines, and then there's some language around standardized disclosures as well, which is a key piece of the new agency requirements. So as I said, what does it mean? Again, protecting the right of consumers to choose who they want to work with. I think that was really fundamental to our message. And then your ability to work with your clients. Although a bit differently, and this is where we'll get into what exactly transactional representation is. I can get to the slide. Here we go. So what is transactional representation? Again, the province will call it the jump ahead too much. The facilitation model. So transactional representation, again, happens when you have two clients interested in the same property. And I'll get to the process here in a sec, but essentially, if through informed consent, so if the consumers and your clients agree to it, you just become an impartial facilitator to the deal. So you're offering information, but not advice or advocacy. So things like a CMA, you can provide that to both clients if you want, but you can't advise them on what price to put in the offer. Clauses are okay, you can present them with clauses they might want to consider, but at the end of the day, the client has to decide which ones they insert. And then obviously confidentiality is key. And it extends to before the transaction as well. So that's these are all requirements that exist in the other provinces that use transactional representation. So we're working off the assumption that Ontario is going to follow this similar sort of path. In terms of how it's different from multiple rep, I think the biggest difference is the forms that are used. So under the current requirements, to get sort of approval to move forward with multiple rep, you're showing your client your form 320, they're initialing the multiple rep section. In transaction rep and transaction brokerage or the facilitation model, whatever they call it at the end of the day, it's likely going to be a separate form all unto itself. And the reason for that is the government thought it was key, if they were going to move forward with this model, that the consumers have a better understanding of what the obligations of you are to them and their obligations back to you as the realtor. So plain language, standardized forms, that's the model that will likely move forward. But that's, I think, the biggest difference. Aside from that, it's actually quite similar to the current situation, just with clear, better disclosures and consent. So in terms of how it works in practice, again, I'm working off the Alberta model here. So this could look slightly different if and when Ontario adopts regulations. But so let's assume that you have a buyer, that you're working with a buyer, and this buyer is interested in your listing. So right away you have to disclose that there's a conflict, that listing's their client as well. And then you present them with options. So the options are, I can refer you to another agent in my brokerage. You can work with them to do an offer on the listing. Or we can continue to work together, but here's what it looks like. Transactional representation. So if your buyer agrees, you can enter into transactional rep. They have to acknowledge and sign the form. And then you go to your listing or your seller. And before you present the offer, you have to get their sign off on the arrangement as well. So they have to sign and initial the form. Once that's done, then you can present the offer. If they don't agree though, then you can't present the offer and you have to go back to your buyer and either refer them, more likely refer them to another agent in your brokerage. So that's how that process works. When it's not appropriate, this is something that the government was quite adamant about. They want us to just give them some examples, and this is examples that we pulled from BC. BC says it's not appropriate for you to enter into transactional rep in every instance. So it's elderly clients, new Canadians who may not understand real estate practices and rules in the province, and then anyone that has English as a second language. Those are the rules that the Alberta regulator identifies. RECA also identifies, by the way, that it's not okay to go into transactional rep just for convenience. So you're hosting an open house and a buyer comes through and tells you they want to make an offer on the property. RECA would say you shouldn't sign them up for transactional rep. You should encourage them to get their own agent to represent them, and then you continue to offer your fiduciary duties to your seller. So that's the difference. So next steps, Bill 166, it just got introduced last week, so that's gone through first reading in terms of the legislative process. It's got to go through another reading inside the legislature. We think it'll probably be passed this fall. That's really just the first step in the process. The regulations are where it's really going to be key for the industry to be engaged, OREA to be engaged. That's where a lot of the details are going to get worked out around how the process works and what kind of impact it has on your business. So my estimation is, and again, this could change because we have an election next year, June of next year is an election. I don't think we'll see regulations in place, implemented, until 2019 of next year. So nothing changes until 2019. The only thing that has come into force immediately is the new fines. The new fines that RICO now has the ability to levy. Those are effective. Those will be effective upon passage of the bill. Okay. So that's multiple rep. I'll take questions at the end if we have time. Just really quickly want to run through a couple more things around the REBBA review for folks in the room. So, as I said, Phase 2 is going to look at the entire Act. And again, what a huge opportunity for us as an industry to give our feedback to government on things we want to see changed, to not only, say, raise the bar as far as, professionalism in the industry goes, but also to help you guys do business better. So what rules are there in the Act? What requirements in the Act are barriers to doing good business? We want to know about those things so that we can go and advocate on your behalf and see if we can't get them changed. So to feed into that process, we've launched a really big consultation. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to visit our consultation microsite. It's called rebbareform.ca. We're publishing white papers on the website itself. You can go on, read the proposals which the task force is putting out to membership for their feedback, and give us your feedback right through the website. It's a pretty cool process. So the white papers themselves are focusing on 4 broad topics. Better enforcement and a regulator that works, so that's talking about RICO and then sort of the powers that they have. Continuing education, so a big question coming out of that, should RICO offer MCE back in the classroom? If you think so, go to the website and tell us. We want to hear that feedback. Registration education, we're going to be publishing that one in a little while. There's the task force is reviewing a number of proposals to strengthen registration education and make it a little tougher to get your license. And then the last one, which we're going to be looking at for next year, which is the largest and most complex, is going to look at the code itself. So this is really where the metal hits a road in terms of changes to the regulations in the Act, which are going to impact your business. So, if you're going to tune in for any one of them, I would definitely say tune in for number 4 in January of next year. By the way, we're emailing all of these out to members. You should have received the first 2. If you didn't, let me know, and I'll make sure you get a copy. So as I said, you can go to the website. We made it super easy. Simplified the proposals, and you can just type the feedback right into the website and hit submit. Like I said, it all gets tabulated on the back end, and then we present it back to the task force and say, here's what the membership is saying about these ideas to strengthen REBBA. So that's it on REBBA. I'm conscious of time, so there's a couple of things I can talk about as far as GR issues. If not, though, if we want to kind of leave some time for questions, we can just go to questions. And I don't want to get too far into lunch. So I don't know, what do you think? 7 minutes? Okay, I'll do this in under 2. Let's go. If I get the clicker to work. So a couple of issues, burning issues that I want to make sure that you're aware of that are impacting your business up at Queen's Park. The Home Energy Rating and Disclosure Program. Hands up if you've heard of this. Yeah, so this is a proposal that the government has on the books right now that would say before home sellers sell their property, they have to do an energy audit, before they list their property, and then they have to post the results of the audit on their listing. It's a mandatory requirement. Every seller in the province would have to do it. So obviously, we don't support this idea. We think it's unnecessary red tape. Regulation is going to punish people wanting to sell their properties. It's going to delay the market. So we're lobbying very aggressively to stop it. We're pitching an alternative that's focused on retrofits and rebates for homeowners to improve energy efficiency rather than waste money on audits, because audits themselves don't improve home energy efficiency. The changes themselves do. Let's focus our attention on that. So we should have, I think in the next month or so, the government will be making an announcement on this program. Fingers crossed we come out on the right side of it. The next one, incorporation. It's been in the media a lot recently. At the federal level, more known, has been consulting with businesses and folks about changes that they want to make to how CRA treats professional corporations. In Ontario, the barrier to you guys doing professional corporations exists in REBBA. So we've been lobbying to get that changed. We've had a couple of bills go into the House that we've had sponsored by all three parties, and it's made it to the second reading, but we haven't quite got it over the hump yet. Unfortunately, what I will say is that more consultation has thrown a bit of a wrench into our work. And then the other thing is, I think it demonstrates, I would say both the Trudeau government and the WYNNE government probably shares the same sort of view, about people who run professional corporations. They were using language like tax cheats and this kind of thing at the outset. The only reason I say that is, in terms of success on this issue with this current government in Ontario, I'm a little skeptical. I wish I had better news for you folks, but philosophically, they have issues with this, or not just with realtors doing it, but with anyone doing it in general. But that being said, we're going to continue to work on it, and hopefully we can change some hearts and minds. Last thing, housing affordability, huge focus for us, especially for our new CEO, Tim Hudak. There were some things in the Fair Housing Plan that you liked around supply. There were some things that we didn't around rent control. I think you folks are familiar with that. Going into next year, June 2018 election, housing affordability is a priority for us. We want all the parties to be talking about how they can make home ownership more affordable for Ontarians. So that's it. I hope I did that quick enough, and I can take any questions that you guys might have. Thank you. Questions? Yes, sir.
I have got a microphone, but just want to ask what kind of disclosure you have to make if you're going to be trying to keep the multiple representation going?
Short answer is probably yes. Probably yes. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry, the question was, if you refer your buyer, your client to another agent in your office, and you're taking a referral fee, do you have to disclose that to the buyer? And the short answer is probably yes. Probably yes. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
As I was looking at your screen, and you're talking about transactional representation, and that before you present the offer with the buyer, the seller should consent. I don't quite understand that. At the time of the listing, why aren't we speaking to the seller to let them know that this situation could arise? Or why are we even bothering to show our own property or doing open houses?
So just to clarify, these are the rules that exist in Alberta right now. That may or may not be the rule in Ontario. I'm just I wanted to kind of give you guys an overview of how it works in practice in sort of models that we researched when we did our consultation on it. So yes, Alberta says before you present your offer, if your buyer agrees, you have to get the seller to sign off on the transactional representation relationship first before you present the offer. The reason I think the regulator would say you have to do that because the transactional representation changes the relationship, essentially from a client to a customer. So both clients at that point become a customer, more of a customer than a client. The duties change. Again, you're not advocating or advising, you're providing information, and it applies equally to both parties. Is that kind of clarifying?
Should the seller not know that at the time of the listing?
That's
That's a possibility.
so yeah.
Why show your own listing?
So we're fast forwarding a bit, but I think what you're pointing to is when you meet with your seller or your buyer, you present them with working with a realtor pamphlet. It's very likely that the pamphlet itself will go through this change for sure, and that it could be a possibility down the road. So, but if that's a good piece of feedback, I haven't had that yet, so I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it is working with a realtor, you would present that.
Yep.
I mean, technically now, when you present an offer, you've got your COC in the front, and that's what you should be presenting first anyways, because if they don't agree to multiple representation, you're not supposed to show them the offer. So it's just the way we practice it.
Great. Other questions?
Well, people, yeah, they don't reject it, technically speaking. No, they don't.
I think we have another,
Well, they should.
another
Okay,
question
more
over here.
questions.
You were talking about the loss of the education budget. When you, what were you referring to? Were you saying, was that in reference to the training, the ongoing training, or ongoing realtors? Like, can you speak to that? Or
Sure.
Okay.
So OREA's budget currently sort of split into two sections. On one side, you have all the revenues coming from the college itself, so that's people signing up for courses, for exams, and the fees they pay for that process in order to go through the registration process and become a real estate registrant in the province. So right now, that's about 60 to 70% of our overall operating budget. On the other side are the dues that you folks pay to the association. And again, that's about 30% of the operating revenue. So when we lose the contract in 2020, when it's done and wrapped up, and the new provider steps in and starts offering registration education, that revenue goes with it. So, which has sort of precipitated some big thinking and some big changes for the association over the next little while. Yeah.
Okay, one more question. Linda. We're just running out of time.
Sorry, this kind of goes back to the other question. What is the last date that somebody will be able to apply, to sign up for, phase 1 to get their license? What is the last date they'll be able to sign up for and do it through OREA?
Great question. Don't quote me on this because I've got to go back and confirm it with my head of the college, but I think it's middle of 19. Then the sort of 19's, in 19, the new program is going to come online. So OREA is going to be winding down its program in 19. And then by 2020, it'll be shut down completely. So, but don't quote, I will get that for you. My head of the college might kick my butt when I get back to the office if I misquoted that, but I'm quite certain it's middle of 19. Yep. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Matthew.